Shabbat Shalom. The latest James Bond movie, No Time to Die, with Daniel Craig, has finally come out in the theaters. But I haven't seen it yet, so I can't comment on it. On the other hand, I did recently see a very different Daniel Craig movie on Amazon Prime. It was a movie made almost 20 years ago in 2002, and it was called Copenhagen. Daniel Craig plays the famous German physicist Werner Heisenberg, who worked with the Nazi government during the war to develop a nuclear reactor. The movie centers on Heisenberg's friendship with his half-Jewish mentor, the famous Danish physicist Niels Bohr. As the movie suggests in the opening scene, Heisenberg is most popularly known for two things: his uncertainty principle in quantum physics, and a very strange and enigmatic meeting that he arranged in 1941 to visit his friend Niels Bohr in what was then Nazi-occupied Copenhagen. It's a very cleverly written script that attempts to explain why Heisenberg sought this unusual visit with his friend in the middle of the war. Was he trying to tell Niels Bohr and therefore somehow get a message to the Allies that the Nazis were working on a nuclear bomb? Was he trying to enlist Niels Bohr's help in the project? Was he trying to tell Bohr that he was intentionally stalling the Nazi project? Or was he seeking absolution from Bohr for helping the Nazis with this deadly weapon? The screenwriter plays on the use of words and the concepts of quantum physics and uncertainty to spin out the various possibilities. And in the process, it also attempts to explain these very complex and mind-bending concepts in physics in ways that a layperson like me could try to understand. This clever use of language in the film, and the use of language that enabled 20th century physics to develop these intricate theories, reminded me of the power of language for human beings. And because I'm a rabbi, that got me thinking about the Bible's most famous story about language. That story appears at the end of this morning's Torah portion. That story, of course, is about the Tower of Babel. According to the story, humanity had gathered together in one stretch of flat land to build a city and a tower that would reach to the heavens. Everyone at that time, according to the story, spoke one language. They wanted to make a name for themselves and to remain clustered together in this small territory. And therefore, they had not spread out across the world, as God had specifically commanded first Adam and Eve and then later Noah to do. But something about this building project displeased God, and so the Bible tells us that God confounded their speech and scattered them around the world, so that in the end, humanity developed different languages and people were unable to communicate with each other. On one level, this story is what we call an etiological story. That is a story that tries to explain the origin of something, how something unusual came about. In the Garden of Eden story, for instance, God punishes the snake by making it crawl on its belly. That is an attempt to explain the very crazy way that snakes move by slithering about on the ground. The Bible story implies that snakes once had feet, like every other creature, but God punished them and took away their feet, and that's why they moved in this crazy way. The Tower of Babel story is an attempt to explain the origin of at least two things. First, we know that there were, in fact, such towers built to the heavens in the Fertile Crescent region, what is now called Iraq. Archaeologists call these towers ziggurats. They were man-made mountains topped by pagan temples to the god. You see, in the flat regions of Iraq, if ancient humans wanted to get closer to the gods whom they thought were up there somewhere, they couldn't climb a mountain because there were no mountains to climb. So they built artificial mountains so that they could ascend to reach up to the heavens. And this story in the Bible, then, is an attempt to explain the ruins of these towers that were well known to our ancestors in biblical times. But secondly, it explains how human beings ended up speaking so many different languages. Why don't we all speak the same language? That's a really good question. And it wasn't until the specific study of languages over the last couple of centuries that we started to figure out how languages grew and developed and morphed into such different forms in different places on the planet. But the Bible explained it as God's response to humanity's trying to storm the heavens. God decided to scatter humanity, and we independently created different languages in our different parts of the world. But these etiological explanations are attempts to describe an unusual situation or phenomenon. They're descriptive, not prescriptive. They don't tell us what we should do about it now. They're merely supposed to describe how we got into this mess. At the end of the story, we learn that the city they were building is called Babel, which is the Hebrew word for the well-known ancient city of Babylon. But it also makes a wonderful pun. And the pun works just as well in English as it does in Hebrew. The Torah tells us that it got the name Babel because once humanity's language was confounded, everyone speaking a different tongue, no one understanding what the other was saying, it seemed to everyone like all the other people were just babbling, which is the sound you make when you do that with your lips. This pun also allows our biblical ancestors to poke fun at the kingdom that would much later come to destroy the city of Jerusalem. The Babylonian Kingdom was a land, according to the Bible, of silly babblers, a people who thought they could conquer the heavens, but were reduced to simpletons by the one and only awesome ruler of the universe, God. But if the story is only descriptive and not prescriptive, what are we to learn about how to behave today? I'm glad you asked. A lot depends on how we understand what God's problem was with the Tower of Babel. It certainly was not a real threat to God. Look how easily he destroyed it. Rabbi Strauss gave one explanation that comes from our sages, that the people were more interested in the bricks and mortar than they were the individual human beings building it. And that's an important lesson that we learn. But in Judaism, we learn lots of different lessons. We look at the Torah portion in many different ways, and we cherish each different explanation. The answer that I like the best as to why God was upset with the Tower of Babel comes directly from the words of Genesis itself. As I said, God commanded the first Adam and Eve and later Noah to increase and fill the earth. This tower building project was specifically designed to keep people all huddled together in one place. Apparently, that was not God's plan. So he confused our language and scattered us. But why was that so important to God? What benefit is there to having us speak different languages and live in different parts of the world? It seems that God specifically wanted humanity to develop different cultures with different languages, different customs and calendars, different histories and literatures, and different ways of looking at the world. Language is one of the most distinctive features, one of the most defining characteristics of human beings. No other species on the planet has such a highly developed means of communicating with each other. And here is what made me think of the Tower of Babel as I was watching the movie about Niels Bohr and Werner Heisenberg. It was the development of a complex language that enabled these scientists to think about the world around us in more complex and challenging ways. It enabled them to formulate more intricate ideas and enabled them to communicate these elaborate thoughts to other human beings, to express their insights and observations, their experiments and their experiences to others, saving these other people the need to spend a lifetime learning the very same lessons all over again. And because we learned how to immortalize our ideas in written form, this magnified our ability to communicate to an ever wider audience of people, especially as we learned how to translate from one language to another. We were now able to communicate not only with those who live in our own lifetimes wherever they lived on the planet, but also for succeeding generations of people yet to come. Successive generations are able to build on this knowledge and go even further and explore ever deeper the mysteries of the universe. Language is an amazing gift for humanity. But by developing different languages and different cultures, two things happened. First, it made it difficult initially to communicate with people of another culture. But second, it allowed each culture to create new and different ways of looking at the world, exploring the world, and then describing the world. And that, in turn, allows for the possibility of different cultures to learn from each other, a different perspective from what they know. We can use the insights developed in another culture to advance and further our own. But first, we needed to overcome that language barrier. Oddly enough, in the 21st century, with all our amazing technology for communication, with iPhones, television, the internet, movies, language translators, and more, we are perhaps more confounded in our ability to actually communicate with each other than ever before. All too often, we get caught up in social media that reinforces our own beliefs without exposing our ideas to other points of view. Or when we do see other people expressing a different perspective, all too often we ridicule or try to embarrass or humiliate the other person for having such outrageous ideas. Note to self, trying to embarrass someone else for their opinions is practically never successful in actually changing someone else's mind. Another result of our technology is that we too often pay less attention to each other than we do to our TVs, smartphones, or video games. How often do we find ourselves immersed in one of these technologies when someone we love comes and tries to talk to us, and we pretend to hear them, but we don't even bother to turn our face and actually listen to what they're trying to tell us? Humanity has this exquisite gift of language that no other creature has, and we so often abuse it. We so often make very poor use of it. So here are three very short things and simple things that we can do to improve our communication skills with each other. First, when talking to another person, speak clearly. Try to put your ideas into words that can easily be understood. Don't be rude or try to humiliate the other person or embarrass them. If you do, you will fail to communicate whatever message you're trying to convey. Rather, try to express your ideas or suggestions in a way that the other person is most likely to understand you. Second, listen intently when someone is talking to you. Don't use your iPhone or computer or continue watching television. Look the person in the eyes and focus on what they're saying. Try to put off formulating your response until you truly understand what they're saying to you. Better yet, repeat back to them what you thought you heard to confirm that you received the message correctly. And then perhaps direct the person to a different point of view and try to have a calm discussion about which perspective makes more sense or seems more credible. And third, have some humility. Realize that no human being knows everything about everything. That's God's privilege and God's alone. Therefore, the person speaking with you quite likely has some element of truth to what they're saying, or at least a different perspective that is worth hearing and considering. You don't have to agree, but you should at least be respectful. Remarking on the problem of good communication, one witty raconteur once said, "I know you believe you understood what you think I said, but I'm not sure you realize that what you heard is not what I meant." But George Bernard Shaw put it much more cleverly and succinctly. The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. The Tower of Babel story, like so many others in the early chapters of Genesis, only come to try to explain a certain condition in the world. In this case, why we all speak different languages and so often fail to communicate with each other. The story does not tell us that we need to perpetuate the situation, especially if it's unhelpful or even destructive. We don't have to perpetuate this poor use of language so that we no longer really understand each other. Let's rather work together to stop the babbling that is all too prevalent in our world today, the incessant failure to really communicate with each other. Let's learn to use our God-given gift of language much more effectively and with grace, compassion, and a little humility. Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you, Rabbi Morgen. And we're now ready to begin our Musaf service. We turn to page 184. Please rise.